Hello, I'm Stefania Van Dyke, Associate Director of Interpretive Engagement at the Denver Art Museum. For the exhibition Wild Things, The Art of Maurice Sendak, I interviewed some of Sendak's loved ones and collaborators. In this 5-part podcast that we're calling Sendak Stories Beyond Wild Things, we're sharing some of their memories about their beloved friend. Here, Tony Kushner talks about how Sendak never condescended to kids, and Lynn Caponera and Jonathan Weinberg discuss their experiences as lifetime friends of the artist.
All of Maurice's work came from very deep places. It was never clowning around for him, really. It was never, there was no condescension. I think that's one of his, the secrets of his genius as a creator of art for kids, is that he didn't condescend at all. He felt that there was no differentiation in his mind between, picture books for kids and paintings by Titian. I mean, he felt that like what he used to call kiddie books should have all the depth and complexity that an artist can find within themselves to put in to the work. And he certainly did that. And that's, I think, why the books are so magnificent and completely in a class by themselves, is that he threw everything inside of himself at his work and used his work as a way of understanding the world. This is also part of Maurice's greatness, is that he really is brave and daring about maternal ambivalence and the ambivalence of children, the mothers that swallow the kids and the kids that swallow the mothers, and, I'll eat you up, as Max says. He gets at this thing that it's not buckets of love flowing between mothers and their children, and fathers are basically absent from the picture. You think of the distraction of the mother in Outside Over There, or the mother in Wild Things who loses her temper, or the parents who just sort of disappear in Baby's parents who have just disappeared, and Pierre's father saying, I'm gonna leave you here, and Pierre won't stop saying, I don't care. It's a complicated world, and it's reflective of his own experience. It's not Victorian at all. It's very modern and very, and I think kids recognize, well, we all do. We recognize it and we love it. I mean, it's so human. I became obsessed with Maurice when I was, I think, 5 years old, and a cousin of mine, and I grew up in Louisiana, had What Do You Say, Dear? And Hole is to Dig, the two Ruth Krauss books. Those were the first Maurice books that I remember reading. And immediately, I remember so vividly just staring at those little kids. And one thing that I loved about them is that they always seemed to be goose-stepping. They had this funny way of walking. He was one of the great draftsmen of the century. So he gets that kind of slightly, the center of gravity is not quite worked out yet and the head is too big thing. But also, as somebody who grew up in the age of dictators and watched Nazis goose-stepping everything, I think it's not an accident that they have this kind of stiff-legged gait, because they're always sort of pretending to power that they actually don't have. And it gives them an enormous pathos. And it's adorable, and it's a little alarming. I forget which book. I think it was Outside Over There. He borrowed somebody's kid because he wanted to see how Ida would, the sort of heroine of Outside Over There, how she would handle things, including her baby sister. And he found somebody got him like a baby doll that was weighted like a real baby. Or maybe they actually had a baby, and he gave it to this little girl to hold. And I just remember Maurice cackling, and I said, well, how did she hold it? And he sort of cackled. It was like she was holding a sack of potatoes. She's like absolutely rough with it. And he liked that about kids. They're very difficult. They're imperious. They're demanding and pushy and vain, and then they collapse in a puddle. And, it's that incredibly difficult business of childhood, of negotiating with power that you have and power that you don't have, and power that you'll eventually get but haven't attained yet, and how much of childhood is really a struggle in that way, and how much of the play of children. He loved Bruegel, the painting of the children's games, because they're all running all over the place pretending to be adults. And I know it's an allegory for adult games, but it's also, next to Maurice, one of the great depictions of what children are really about. Famously in Dear Millie, there's in St. Joseph's Garden, she sees Mozart is conducting a group of children, and these are French Jewish children. They're from a photograph of French Jewish children who are about to be put on a train and deported to a concentration camp. There's Mozart lying on his side, conducting them in a choir, but this is, after all, it's saying the garden turns out to sort of be the afterlife. I mean, Dear Millie is interesting. Of course, the story is not his; it's the Grimms. After Where the Wild Things Are, I think sort of beginning with Outside Over There, Maurice was always treading a very interesting line between what little kids that read Where the Wild Things Are for the first time or have it read to them are frequently a little scared by it. Just as you are when you see Bambi or watch The Wizard of Oz or the Grimm's fairy tales. I mean, there's often terror as part of the literature. When you watch a kid encountering a work of art like Where the Wild Things Are, they'll find it a little scary and a little hard to sit through the first time. Then they immediately want to hear it again, or the next night they want to hear it again. And they'll drive you nuts because they'll want to listen to it 800 times. And when you watch a kid doing this, I observed this was my older niece, when I brought her when she was a little girl, Outside Over There. And the first night it gave her nightmares. And then she woke up saying, I want read it again. And you realize that this is the function of the work for these kids, is it's teaching you mastery. You become familiar with the terror, and you realize that it's not going to destroy you, and that you are actually mastering it. You're controlling it. You become bigger than it, and it gives you a kind of courage and a knowledge that what is foreign and scary and dropping you off in the unknown can be handled. Fear is not going to destroy you. I think he was, as great as it gets in doing that, because, of course, if you showed a kid something really terrifying, it would damage them. It would do injury. They could look at something really genuinely horrifying over and over, and there'd be no reassurance. It's optimal frustration is what you're aiming at. And a great artist for children has to understand where that line is, and Maurice understood it beautifully. But I think that We're All in the Dumps with Jack and Guy, a little bit in Outside Over There, although visually I think it's probably his most spectacular work. But it is a little terrifying. I mean, Ida falling backwards out the window, and it's not Max in that boat, where it all sort of stays somehow very Hamish, even though he's going on this adventure. And of course, the Wild Things are like the most perfect goblins ever created for children because they're scary and adorable. When we started working on Brundabar, I think I had a nervousness about it because, Brundabar was written as a children's opera that was composed in Prague in 1938, but then it was sort of smuggled into Terezin concentration camp. And the composer, Hans Krause, was an immensely talented young composer, was murdered in Auschwitz. And the opera was performed by the children in Terezin as a part of a sort of propaganda program that the Nazis were conducting by having this very artistic concentration camp. But then most of the kids who performed were then shipped off to Auschwitz and Birkenau and killed. Maurice was always thinking about the Holocaust. I mean, he was a kid when it was happening and had a very powerful sense of the having grown up in the security of the United States while Jewish kids in Europe were being destroyed by the millions. Like when we first got to There's a Bully, it's kind of amazing that the Nazis allowed them to perform Brundabar because it's clearly an anti-fascist, sort of socialist anti-fascist literature. And the Hofmeister who wrote the libretto, there's a bully who plays the organ, is the eponymous character. Brundabar means bumblebee in Czech, and he plays the organ, and he won't let the kids, the sort of an accordion, hurdy-gurdy, and he won't let these two little kids who are trying to raise money to buy milk for their mother, which is why Maurice fell in love with the thing when he first heard this gorgeous Czech recording of it that a friend sent him. again, this reversal that the mother is sick and the kids have to go and get milk for her was just made for Maurice. But when I did first I did the libretto. He asked me to do the libretto in English, and we were just going to do a stage production. And then after I finished the libretto, he said, let's do the children's book. Let's do a book first, and then we'll do. So I rewrote the libretto as a children's book, which was a wonderful experience. We talked a lot about kids watching it would have no knowledge about its history. But there are parts of it, especially the lullaby that the kids sing when they chase Brindlebar away. All the school kids and the two little kids who are trying to raise money sing a lullaby. And the lullaby is all about children singing to their mothers saying, you're going to get old and we're going to leave you and we're going to fly away from you. And the melody kills you. It's just, and when you think about kids in the children's section of a concentration camp singing that song, it's almost unbearable. We really grappled a lot with the question of, at what age should a child know about the Holocaust? Do you really want a little kid at 5 or 6? I mean, they might have heard. There are certain things you want a little kid at 5 or 6 to know. Don't take candy from strangers. Don't get into somebody's van. Don't, run out in traffic and so on. But do you really want a little kid to know that there is evil like that in the world? Don't you sort of want to protect them? And as they grow into their own power and strength and become more and more adult, they'll let you know, I think, in general, when they're ready to take on, I was about 10 when I started asking a lot of questions about what the Holocaust was. And even then, I think my parents were somewhat careful about it.
Here are Jonathan Weinberg, curator of the Maurice Sendak Foundation, and Lynn Caponera, executive director of the foundation.
I first met Maurice when I was 10 years old. His partner of 50 years was Eugene Glynn, a psychiatrist, was my mother's best friend. They grew up together, and so I met him at a party, and he did a drawing of a lion for me that I still have.
And I, as well, grew up with Maurice. He moved into our neighborhood when I was 11, so I was just constantly over here hanging out with Maurice and Eugene and his puppies, which was even more important than Maurice and Eugene to me. But now our lives revolve around, thankfully, around caring for Maurice's artwork and his legacy. Maurice often would tell a story as a way of making you recognize something. Like we're right now sitting in Maurice's living room, which is right under his bedroom. His bedroom's upstairs, and I can relay a story he told me that I have to believe it wasn't a story, because in Maurice's mind, if I don't believe, it means I don't care. And the story goes like this. I lived in the house at that time, and I heard a racket, and I came upstairs, and it was like the middle of the night, and I could hear Maurice coming down the stairs, and he came down the stairs, and he sat with me on the couch, and he said, "Did you see the bat?" And I said, "No, I didn't see the bat." He says, "Well, there's a German bat in the house," and the bat spoke German to him. And it's not that he was crazy. He just wanted to tell me something. And what he wanted to tell me is that the German bat told him to make sure that Lynn knows that I love her. And he was going through this sort of like this way of making the story that in his mind, he had to make sure I knew that he loved me at that time in the middle of the night. And instead of just coming right out and saying it, he had to have this bat say it. And it had to be a German bat. And I just made the silly joke of saying, well, I don't speak German, so I don't know what he's saying. And he goes, "No, I'm telling you, this is what the bat said." And if you didn't believe it, he would get very angry. So you knew you had to say, "I love you too, Maurice," and I'm sure the bat understands what I'm saying. Even though I don't speak German, I bet the bat speaks English. He had done books about bats, and he knew that I loved some of the bat drawings that he owns by Beatrix Potter. So I think that was just his way of putting a pin in the fact that he wanted to make sure I knew he loved me. Maurice just had this really great way of talking to children in a respectful manner. I mean, he didn't tell you things you shouldn't know as an 8-year-old, but he talked to you on a level where he wasn't giving you any kind of sugarcoating on things. He would tell you things like the truth as much as he thought you could handle it. And I think that really comes through in his work, is that he doesn't talk down to children. He talks to them as though you're having a conversation with somebody and you really want to know what they think about something. And that was how he was with children. If he asked you a question about, oh, what do you think about something I'm working on? He really wanted you to tell him what you thought of it, whether it was good or bad. I think his way with children was, and it's really weird to even say his way with children, because he was that way with adults too. I mean, it was just humans, so and animals as well, as his dogs as well. So
I would say both of them were actually interested in what kids think. That's part of the thing, is that they didn't speak down to kids. I don't think I ever saw Maurice get down on his knees and speak to a child, right? He spoke sort of directly to them and cared about them and found them entertaining and interesting. And the first time I ever met him, when I was 10 years old at a party, I'm almost embarrassed. I remember like sitting with him for maybe an hour just talking. He drew pictures. If you were a kid and you were smart, you put a piece of paper in front of him and a pen, and he would start drawing for you and entertaining you. I mean, he loved to do that. He just loved to do that. And it was never condescending or in any way. And I think that's a gift.
And I should add too that Maurice was like the most tremendous teacher ever. I mean, that was the thing, that when a kid came into the house, it was like, here, let me show you my Blakes. And then he would tell them all about Blake, and he would say he would give them the whole history of Blake, and kids were really interested in it too. There they had Maurice telling them, this is what Blake drew for this story, and this, he was a really tremendous teacher that didn't like put facts at you, but showed you things and shared his things and shared his experiences with whatever book he was working on or whatever artwork he was looking at. I mean, he was very open about sharing everything that he owned and thought about.
Extremely passionate about things. I guess we keep coming back to the idea about caring about stuff. So what's extraordinary about and original about so many of his books is that they don't have some kind of obvious moral. They're not teaching you some lesson necessarily. But Pierre is the exception to the rule, right? It does have a moral. The moral is to care, but it doesn't tell you what you have to care about, just that you care about something passionately. And I think that was really the way he was. That was the kind of message. And about the past, right? So that's a key thing.
I wondered, did he ever encourage you all? It sounds like he treated everyone the same, basically. Adult, kid, he's going to talk to you how he's going to talk to you. But did he ever encourage the kids around him, you included, to do make-believe, to act things out or dress up?
Not like that. No. But art, he certainly encouraged me to make art and draw and make believe.
He did a thing where he would pretend, he'd come down in the morning and he'd put his bathrobe over his head and pretend he was like a zombie. That's about it. And then he'd want my son to pretend to be a zombie as well.
I mean, this is a really interesting conversation for us to talk about, because what occurs to me is, and this is why things are so unbelievably complicated. We fetishize childhood, as this ideal time, and Maurice certainly did in many ways. But what are children often doing when they're little kids? They're pretending to be grown-ups, right? As mad as their attempt at being grown-ups is, right? If you watch them and listen to them, most of the time, that's what Rosie's doing.
That's what Max is doing.
That's what Max is doing. That's what Rosie's doing. They're all pretending to be grown-ups. And so I think Maurice retained some of that, right? So if you're a child, you want to be taken seriously like a grown-up, right? And what grown-ups do is they put you into this idealized world. And Maurice remembers what that's like. In terms of his connection to what it is to be a child, it is to be imaginative, but it isn't necessarily, to live as if you were deluded. I don't think Maurice thought in his being childhood self that meant that he should just, check out on the real world. If that makes sense, that wouldn't be for him what it is to be a child. And if some peculiar way to be a child is to be strangely precocious, it's kind of paradoxical. So you're like that little one was Johnny, right? Acting like a little grown-up wanting to read when all these people are trying to get you to do things. Or you're insisting on autonomy. You want to be control over your world. Maurice's children want to have control. One of the things that makes Maurice so wonderful is that he remembers what it's like to feel helpless as a child, right? I think we often think of childhood idealized as because we feel, well, children can imagine themselves into some paradise. And Maurice's children maybe do that to some degree, but they also express anger about that, right? Partially Pierre doesn't care because it's not his world, right? I can see Lynn is absolutely right. Pierre, in some ways, does express that, the rage against the fact that his parents are making all the decisions. And so he doesn't want to participate in anything. He wants to be the person who decides what he cares about. Maybe that's the idea. That's how it's a self-portrait of Maurice. But it isn't just because he's grumpy, right? Or whatever the word was that you used.
Curmudgeon.
Or curmudgeon or whatever. It's because Maurice's children want to be autonomous, but they also want their parents still to love them. They want to be free and able to do whatever they want to do, and they still want you to love them nonetheless. That's sort of a Maurice child.
Thank you for listening to Sendak Stories Beyond Wild Things. The exhibition Wild Things, The Art of Maurice Sendak is on view at the Denver Art Museum through February 17, 2025. For more information about this exhibition, visit www.denverartmuseum.org. Intro and outro music is from the Magic Flute Overture by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. This podcast was produced by Postmodern Company in Denver, Colorado. If you're listening on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And please check out the other episodes in this series.